Hi, I'm Mike Baker. This is National Arts, and we are on Broadway. The first original American play on Broadway in the 1999 season was Warren Leight's gripping new play, Sideman. With Christian Slater as the play's narrator and Conscience, Sideman tells the story of one man's obsession with jazz, a horn player named Gene, and the hilarious and devastating effects it has on his wife Terry, son Clifford, and his friends. The play also recounts the rise and fall of the big band movement and imparts a bit of jazz history along the way.
You know who you sound like? You sound like Dizzy.
Don't ever say that.
There is something that you do that he does.
Only an octave and a half lower.
You don't know how good you are.
Warren, Sideman is a tender and deeply personal memory play, isn't it?
I stand accused.
And it does harken back to some familial relationships and your life as a whole, doesn't it?
I tell people it's autobiographical enough.
But obviously you grew up in a jazz home.
My father was a did nothing but play trumpet for a living for 50 years, which is an accomplishment, and my mother never forgave him for it, I'd say.
When he's up there playing, he's in touch with everything that's going on around him. Ziggy bends a note, he echoes it instantly. A car horn sounds outside, he puts it into his solo or harmonizes under it a second later. I used to wonder how he could sense everything while he was blowing and almost nothing when he wasn't.
Isn't it interesting that someone who plays jazz so beautifully, it's sinewy, it's lyric, it's ever-changing, can also be a terrible person on the other end of the spectrum when it comes to passionate relationships and giving?
It's the paradox. If not a terrible person, almost more, I'd say, absent. I've known a lot of these guys, and they're completely alive on stage and completely in tune with the world around them, and then they might not notice that their wife is pregnant. I was talking to someone last night who came and saw the show, and she said, my first husband was a jazz musician, and my second husband, one night he came home and he brought home toilet paper with him, and I cried because he noticed that we were running low. And I just thought it was pathetic, but it's an odd that she had gotten so used to a guy who's only there when the horn was in his hands.
Later in the play, exactly what you're talking about, here is Clifford just trying to get his father's attention, trying to feel his passion in some way, and he's mimicking his father playing Clifford Brown.
There's a real moment that comes from. I remember as a kid, he's playing along with his father to a Clifford Brown tape. And I remember when that tape first went around, and I remember watching my father and his friends listen to it, and they were so much more alive than I was used to seeing them. And they don't remember this moment at all, by the way, but as a kid, it was suddenly seeing your father come to life, someone said it was like watching the hand go into the puppet, but that's a little harsh. When my father first came to see the play, he told me he was up all night after he saw it, and I said, well, I was afraid of that. And he said, yeah, I was up all night trying to figure out who's playing trumpet on I Remember Clifford.
Is the horn Gene's narcotic? Is that why he's not able to give it up?
Yeah. I have one guy in the play who's a junkie, but I think I meant that metaphorically as well, that you can no more take a trumpet out of his hand than a drink out of an alcoholic's hand, he doesn't know who he is without that horn.
And you've been careful to have him caress it and treat it with tremendous reverence, almost like you would an infant.
When he leaves, that's right, when he leaves the apartment, there's a kind of what for my writing passes as a climax in the play. When he leaves the apartment, he takes his trumpet with him and cradles it, and he's leaving everything else behind, but that goes with him.
He told me never to tell anybody, but I think he sounds like Dizzy.
In a way. He's got nicer tone than Dizzy. But he does those same long lines. Every solo has a beginning, a middle, and an end when he plays.
One of the musicians talks about a good jazz solo as being a beginning, a middle, and an end. And when I heard that, I could almost liken that development to this entire play. Is this entire play a jazz solo?
I like that. And what I wanted, the whole play takes place in the instant that that Clifford, the thinly disguised narrator, walks into this bar and hears his father. And then it's basically 2 hours of flashbacks piecing together his life, or a collage. And that's, the great trumpet solos begin by stating the melody, and then the first chorus veers off and then goes farther out and farther out. And a John Coltrane solo will almost take you through the history of jazz and then come back to the melody by the end. And the whole play takes place in the Melody Lounge, and by the end of the play, Clifford's back in the melody, watching his father play. And I would like to think of it as that way. It's tricky writing a play about music, wanting it to feel like a jazz solo and have a rhythm to it, and also to function as jazz and words don't always go well together.
Early on, we see a lot of humor. Then we see humor mixed with heartbreak. Then we see considerable heartbreak. But then we see some form of resolution. Is that the pattern you were looking for?
Yeah, and you're very good. No, I mean, I appreciate it, because I'm used to going for jokes, and that's the kind of writing I'd mostly done. And I had avoided writing this story. My first impulse was, the first time I saw the play described as a drama, I was shocked, and then I realized, oh, I think that's what it is, actually.
Anybody here know how to play guitar? Too bad. That kid will do to horn players what talkies did to Buster Keaton.
It's not just about the degradation of this family in some way, but it's also about the failing of the big band movement, and the fact that Elvis comes along and rock and roll comes along, and this much heralded movement is relegated to the basement.
You have some of the greatest musicians of the century reduced to playing weddings and bar mitzvahs, if they're lucky, and most of them, I guess the number of trumpet players between 1950 and 1960, working trumpet players, did it fall by 90%? And then from 1960 to 1970 by another 90%. It was sort of the dark ages of jazz, and maybe sadder because in 1950 these were the rock stars of their day, or the baseball players of their day. They were really, I mean, they were heroes.
How do you dance to this?
You don't, you drink to it. That's another reason why jazz is dying. Let's go to the bar.
The background music that we hear throughout recordings and what have you, that sort of traces the legacy of jazz throughout the piece too. And one particular tune, I only heard a couple of bars of it, but Willow, Weep for Me, a very poignant moment in the piece.
Well, yeah, and that's the only trumpet solo I had recorded for this show. Mostly we use great recorded soloists, as if Gene could be Lee Morgan and Clifford Brown rolled into one. But on any given night, a sideman could play a solo like that. But for this one solo, it's the moment really where Clifford's childhood more or less is over at that point. The family has really hit its bottom. The mother has finally given in to everything that's been dragging her down. So it's her emotional nadir in the show, and I wanted, Willow Weep for Me is about as poignant a tune as you can get. And there's a great Billie Holiday, there's several great versions of it, but I just wanted, it's the only a cappella horn in the show, and it's a muted trumpet played by a sideman named Bert Collins, who's a friend of my father's and who I've known since I was a kid. And he came in and laid it down in about 30 seconds in a room with a radiator in it, and just sort of, it's a gorgeous 8 bars or 16 bars, and it's just enough to, by that point it should be a lone trumpet voice. You don't want to hear anything but that.
Warren, since Sideman is a little history of jazz, and because we do see this familial relationship, and we see really sort of the turning point in jazz, we see resolution at the end of this play. So we're also seeing hope for the future for jazz, aren't we?
Well, it's funny. The play ends in 1985 which is just when jazz is beginning to come out of what I call the dark ages of jazz. And there's a new generation of players now who actually understand what was being done in the 30s and the 40s and 50s. And I made a very conscious choice at the end of the play. All the musicians that we've come to know in the play, they've taken every hit imaginable, but they're all still alive and they're all still playing. And I like that. There's enough sadness in that world, but the thing about these guys is they keep playing. I got a letter from a drummer's daughter who saw the show, and she said, and I guess she's a writer, a playwright now, and she said that she will never come anywhere near the discipline of her father, who doesn't have many gigs at this point, but wakes up every day and still sits down and plays the drums, practices 3 hours a day for what may be 1 club date a month. But there's the passion that they had for that world kind of ensured it would survive as bad a couple of decades as an art form can weather.
I walk in and I can hear him before I see him. He's playing a ballad. He could play me 100 trumpet solos and I know which one was his. My father's voice.
It's sort of amazing how it all came about and the role became available for me. I had sort of put the vibe out there that I wanted to do a play. I've been wanting to do a play for a long time. And I don't know if I'd ever really been available to do it before or willing to do it before. And this script came across my desk, and my friend of mine read it, and I read it, and then we got tickets to see it at the Roundabout, and just loved it. You know, it really did push so many buttons in me, and I walked out of there sort of confused as to what the deal was with it. I wasn't sure if there was a role available or what was happening. And then when I found out the actor was leaving to go do Cabaret, it just was perfect. And then I sat down with Warren and Michael, Michael Mayer, the director, and we sat there at Joe Allen's, which is, you know, really felt like a good theater. You know, and I used to go there all the time when I was, you know, well, 15 years ago. I'd go there with my mother after a show, and so it just. And then after the lunch, you know, I didn't say, you know, yes, I'm there, but we walked past the theater. You know, it was. We walked up the street and it was right there on 45th, and it just was like, it was magical. I don't know, it was crazy. It was the John Golden Theater, and then we walked up to the end of the block, and I just knew, you know, and I hugged the two of them goodbye, and I just knew that I had to do this. You know, there was no doubt about it. But it was almost like the decision was made for me. I didn't even have to make the decision. It kind of put itself in my path, and I would have had to fight to avoid it, you know. I mean, there was no way to avoid it.
There's a whole jazz language that you're beginning to sort of infuse, aren't you?
Yes, yes, a whole jazz language, getting some life back in my chops and all of that stuff. Yeah, I started to incorporate that into my dialogue.
You talked to me just before the interview about hearing a song
yes.
for Clifford and,
yes.
and how that's begun to move you.
Being a part of the play, sometimes the nerves, you know, you get so into it, and when the audience is out there, there's just sort of that extra added energy. But it's a very sneaky play. There's like little parts of it that kind of creep into your soul at different times on different nights. And one night I was up there and I was doing the scene sitting next to my father where he's playing the Clifford Brown solo for me, and I kind of had a little bit of an out-of-body sort of experience where I forgot about everybody that was out there, and I just kind of like zoned in on him and was really watching him listening to this music, and it did seep into my soul. It's been a real interesting process that way.
I heard several people sort of sigh when the whole notion of Song for Clifford came up toward the end of the show,
Mm-hmm.
and the first thing out of the box was, oh, Clifford Brown, not Clifford, my son.
Yes, yes. I mean, these guys were so oblivious, I suppose, to what was really going on around them, particularly my father. I mean, I can't say on a whole that all of these jazz men were just so focused, but I think there were just certain events that took place in Gene's life, the guy who was playing my father, where he really was forced to shut down to so many things on the outside and focus on the one thing that really did bring him so much joy and pleasure.
I talked to Warren about it being almost a narcotic, this whole notion of sort of immersing yourself into the horn.
Yes.
And not being able to see anything beyond that,
Right.
that reality. I mean, it's almost parallel to what your mother has experienced
Yes.
with alcoholism.
There's definitely parallels. I mean, they both use something outside of themselves to fix on. And to me, the play is so much about being true to thine own self. There's, as the play takes course, there's little moments throughout where my father or my mother really do shut down emotionally, and they stuff all their feelings. You know, my father he's not necessarily happy about the fact that, you know, she's going to have a baby, but he ends up surrendering to it and really sacrificing his own soul. You know, he's not true to himself.
I mean, he doesn't know who you are yet because you haven't been born. But if you think about it, it's kind of sad. He's willing to give you up, and she's a little resentful for when you're born.
It's true. This is a large, something that happens, I think, in families. And then what happens to the kid begins to feel this responsibility and this pressure to sort of keep the family together. And that's really what the character of Clifford represents so much. I mean, he wants to be the hero in his family and sort of be the glue that holds it all together. And it's impossible, you know, and he eventually gets out of it, but for a long time he's really so immersed in it that he does lose sight of himself, and it becomes all about, you know, taking care of his father, taking care of his mother, you know, making sure that they're okay. It's like if he's not there, they'll fall apart.
There is no rest. From the time I was 4, I knew the family was headed for financial ruin.
Are you going to finish your crackers?
The time I was 6, I and everyone else knew that it would be up to me to save
I
us.
heard about people making money with money, but I always figured that was a sick head to get into.
Yeah.
Jazzonomics is why I can't afford to take the RISD scholarship.
Roles have totally reversed themselves, haven't they?
Yes, yes. I mean, Clifford really becomes the parent to his parents. You know, the parents become the children in a large respect, and it's very sad. It's very sad. I mean, these people, they didn't really develop communication skills with each other. It was all about that outside fix.
You know, these
You went
things...
out with the guys, had fun, come home alone and you went out with the guys. Was Patsy there?
Jerry, please.
She always had a thing for you.
Jerry, Patsy had a thing for everybody.
Don't get small with me!
The thing that's so heartbreaking about this situation is that there is, you know, there's so much confusion, but at the core of it, there's so much love between everybody, you know, and that's what really gets covered up by the end, which is very sad.
Symbolically, Clifford is the only one that sees the light of day.
Yeah, no, there's something, there's a real, I don't know what it is, magic in Clifford. I don't know if I necessarily would have reacted the way that he does in this play, but he's Clifford. I don't know what it is. There's something really, there's a real strength within him. Now, I wasn't the type of kid that necessarily, you know, would make the dinner, or I wasn't doing that sort of stuff. I wasn't setting up the table, you know. I was going off to work, you know. I mean, I was doing that kind of stuff, and at the age of 10, you know, so I was out there performing, but yeah, so Clifford and I were different in some respects.
When I talked to Warren, he talked a lot about some of the former sidemen coming to see the show and how moving it was for him.
Yes.
Not only to see your performance, but to see this whole era sort of recreated, at least for a time.
Yeah, there's been a wonderful, wonderful reaction. It's amazing to be backstage and hear these Henri Arnaud, the French jazz critic, he was backstage one night. I believe he was backstage one night, and it was just amazing. You know, I mean, here's, you know, a real part of that history, you know, coming to really show their appreciation and embrace the play. So it's been a miracle.
This is a good time for you.
Ah, thanks.
Broadway, Very Bad Things.
Yeah.
There's a lot of Slater out there.
Yeah, it's lovely. It's I don't know what to say other than, you know, I have a lot of gratitude and a real appreciation. Yeah, Very Bad Things is certainly a different kind of, well, certainly a different kind of character. I really got to, you in a lot of ways, you know, play like the darkest side, I think, of a person. I mean, this guy is just, he's a very, very dark character. It's been, you know, it's like when I first saw the movie, I had nothing else to compare it to, you know, so I just went, wow, this is great. It's, you know, energetic, it's exciting, and but then after doing Clifford on stage, and I saw the movie again, I kind of went, oof, boy, you know, Clifford is such a nice character, and he's got such a good soul and such a good heart, and the Very Bad Things character is just so, you know, he's the beast. I mean, he really is.
Speaking of that, do you think that somehow the characters that we play, that we gain anything from that, at least psychologically, or is it just subconscious wash?
For me, when I was doing Very Bad Things, it came at such a perfect time, you know, and to play a character that was so energetic and so passionate, and you know, could just let all that stuff out. It was sort of, it was, you know, it was another one of those things that was kind of like it was put in my life at the exact right time for me to do. So I'm grateful for that.
For decades, Gene blew life into the trumpet, but slowly it siphoned his air and became a stranglehold on his existence. How ironic that something so sinewy, lyric, and ever-changing ceased to be a passion suited for heaven's framing. I hope you enjoyed our discussion with gifted playwright Warren Leight and his autobiographical counterpart, Christian Slater. See you next time on National Arts on Broadway.